κομπλέ είναι τα εκείνα τα κουράσια.
Γιατί μετά πέφτει.
Πέφτει, όπως τα είδες και πριν. Γεια σε όλους και όλες. Περνάμε.
Everybody, let's start our third session of our symposium. For those who were not in the first two sessions, we are holding the first international congress in the memory of people's lawyer Ebru Timtik, in which after 238 days of hunger strike, lost her life in prison, where she was holding this hunger prize, hunger strike, asking for a fair trial. We thank all those lawyers who took part in the first and second thematic session earlier today, and we are happy to start the third session. The title is The Black Side of Law. It essentially has to do with so-called anti-terrorist laws. This is how the bourgeois law calls them, the law that is a tool at the hands of the dominant classes and uses laws against the rights and freedoms of the peoples. This is our third session, which will start with lawyer from India, Nilofer Bhagavat, who is also the vice chair of the Lawyers Association of the whole of Asia and the Pacific. It's an honor to have her among us. She's a fighter, a lawyer, one that for many years has fought for human rights, to support the rights of her class, and thus she and her family have become targets of attacks by the authorities. You have the floor.
My presentation at this symposium relates to terrorism, anti-terrorist laws, and judicial decisions. This paper is a tribute to those colleagues of ours whom we have lost, lawyers whom we have lost all over the world, including our Turkish colleagues. They have paid the ultimate sacrifice because they were undeterred, despite the fact that they knew that we are living in dangerous times. This is a period which we will one day refer to as the age of state terror. Considering the gallery of portraits of the bravest of the brave, among them Ebru Timtik, the brave heart and soul, it is necessary for us to understand who are the terrorists, who are responsible for the terrorism that we experience today. And I will be quoting from official documentary sources. Whereas on the one hand, citizens are being indiscriminately arrested and unjustifiably called terrorists, the real terrorists, as per high-level records, including of the European Parliament, tells us a different narrative about who is responsible for several terrorist attacks across continents. In November 1990, the European Parliament published a resolution on the Gladio affair. And this is what the resolution said. I cannot read the whole resolution, just extracts. In certain member states, military secret services or uncontrolled branches thereof were involved in serious cases of terrorism and crime as evidenced by various judicial inquiries. Now, the resolution went on to emphasize who was behind it. The resolution emphasized that European governments must protest vigorously at the assumption by certain US military personnel at supreme headquarters, Allied powers Europe, and in NATO, that is the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, of the right to encourage establishments in Europe of a clandestine intelligence and operation network. The resolution recommended that all governments in Europe dismantle all clandestine military and paramilitary networks. So this is the document of the European Parliament, that NATO headquarters were responsible for covert terrorist activities in the countries of Europe to alter the composition of the government and to create fear among the citizens. Now, NATO did not respond, and the CIA and MI6, who were named by the Prime Minister of Italy in his report to the Italian Parliament, also did not contradict this resolution of the European Parliament. Now, recently, memory is short, public memory is short, we have lived through the terror of the lockdown, where certain forced measures were taken, including the isolation, extreme isolation of lockdown. And here again, in 2023, the European Parliament convened a high-level session of scientists and doctors. And what did they opine? They criticized all the forced measures taken and said that it did nothing. It was not necessary, none of these measures were necessary, and that citizens were actually put in fear of the entire situation as it had developed. This is the second example of the kind of terrorism which is being spread in society using maybe a bioweapon terror attack. The third example is very recent, where on the one hand, there's a war on the Ukrainian front. And on the other hand, statements were made by the former US Undersecretary for Political Affairs, Victoria Nuland, that President Putin was in for nasty surprises. Now, it was not President Putin who were in for nasty surprises. It was the civilian population of Moscow Oblast who were being targeted. And 150 died, hundreds were injured in clearly a terrorist attack. 2 weeks earlier, the US Embassy in the Russian Federation and otherwise the State Department had told its citizens that a terrorist attack is going to take place in a public place. Till today, there is no clarification from Washington as to what was the nature of information they had. But hundreds of civilians, innocent women, children, and men, paid with their lives for attending a concert. They were not frontline soldiers in the Ukraine war. The third incident, the fourth incident is even more serious. And it relates to the famous 9/11 so-called terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York. A general who was chief of staff, a Russian general, General Leonid Ivashov, who was chief of staff of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on that day, on 9/11. And he was former vice president of the Russian Academy for Geopolitical Affairs also. There was an Axis of Peace conference in 2005 in Europe. And at this Axis for Peace conference, he gave an analysis of what was behind the nature of these terrorist attacks. And again, I just will give you just two extracts from that analysis. The organizers of the attack, he refers to 9/11, the organizers of the attack were the political and business circles interested in destabilizing the world order and who had the means necessary to finance the operation. Second, we have to look for the reasons of the attack in coincidence of the interests of big capital at global and international levels. So this is what it is. Whilst lawyers, civilian citizens are being arrested and charged with terrorism, very serious attacks have taken place. And the reason I've given you this documentation, it relates both to Europe and North America. And it is not documents that we have produced. These are from the archives of the government and officials at the highest level. So our experience, what is our experience? In South Asia is that it is imperialism which has used cross-border terrorism in South Asia. And they have used, in Asia and South Asia, and they have used proxy states to launch that terrorism, what we call cross-border terrorism. This is to restructure societies and states in accordance with the imperialist objective of that region. And in countries of South Asia, whilst our governments oppose cross-border terrorism, but unfortunately in South Asia, our governments also use internal terrorism as false flag operations to create incidents when they want to divert citizens and change the political narrative by advancing a false narrative to divert attention from the very important and basic economic issues of the day. In a leading case from India, in the Supreme Court, in the case of Nalini Sundar versus State of Chhattisgarh, a case decided in 2011, the Supreme Court directed the state government to disband all vigilante organizations to deal with a so-called tribal insurgency in the heart of central India. And this is what the Supreme Court said. The Supreme Court said that these vigilante organizations were to counter insurgency of the tribal people, were attributed to economic conditions. And the Supreme Court said it is the amoral economic policies of the state, amoral, which is causing the unrest. And there is no basic foundation for the insurgency except the amoral economic policies of the state in that region. And a culture of unrestrained selfishness and greed spawned by modern neoliberal ideology. The Supreme Court was referring to the companies who had gathered there to take away or confiscate the lands of the tribal people. Their resources, their water resources, their land resources, as well as because these are lands which had which are in mineral-rich areas. Now, what do we see? We have been discussing so many countries, our representatives have made presentations. And we find that from country to country, there is a choreography of terrorism, a choreography of anti-terrorist laws. So what is behind this? What is behind this so-called declaration of war of terror on the people of so many different countries? Now, the answer lies in a global pattern which has been established to camouflage the seizure of the surpluses of people and societies by global companies and escalating capital flight to powerful global financial centers by diverting attention to terrorism. Unless we understand what is behind this, what is behind this terrorist campaign, labeling this one as terrorist and that one terrorist. This is basically societies are hemorrhaging of their own earned resources. And there are huge diversions of capital, diversions of capital flight. And this entire atmosphere of anti-terrorist laws and terrorism is to camouflage that kind of diversion. Now here, I would also like to refer briefly to global terrorist organizations which were established by imperialism, and these are well known. Al-Qaeda, you must have heard of Al-Qaeda. ISIS, infamous ISIL, Daesh. These are all foreign legions of NATO. Whenever there is to be an attack on a country which wants to continue its sovereign policies and does not want to cave into global finance capital, then you have Al-Qaeda released on it, or you have ISIS, or you have ISIL, or you have Daesh. And you will be shocked to know that it was discovered in Syria that some of these members of the ISIS-ISIL were on social security payrolls in Europe. And they were the fighters there. At the same time, they were on social security payrolls of Europe. This is the serious nature of these foreign legions of imperialism which have been let loose. Now, on the one hand, we have been subject to cross-border terrorism, and it is true that in India, we also face cross-border terrorism in two regions, in Kashmir and in Punjab. This was unleashed on us by imperialism when we were broadly aligned with the anti-imperialist foreign policy of the Soviet Union. It began at that time. But thereafter, after cross-border terrorism was defeated by the people, not by anti-terrorist laws, but by the people of these two regions, then the Indian elite has used internal terrorism as a method of diversion from the kind of capital flight which is taking place. And it would interest you to know that an economist has done a study, and he has said that the capital flight which is taking place from India today in the last 2.5 decades, ever since we adopted neoliberal policy, is equal to the financial drainage from India under British colonialism from 1912 to 1960. So you can see we are ostensibly an independent sovereign country. Yet the financial drainage which is taking place today is equal to the financial drainage which took place at that time. So you may not have a military positioned on your territory, but yet there will be other methods used for the financial or capital flight, and it will be camouflaged under the garb that there is terrorist activity going on in the country. But how do we assess whether that terrorist activity is genuine and not genuine? What is the benchmark? What is the touchstone? And that touchstone is to be found in the nature and kind of people they are arresting under so-called terrorist activity. Now we have two acts which are in use. One is the National Security Act of 1980, and the other is the Prevention of Unlawful Activities Act of 1967. Now, I must state honestly that neither of these two acts were passed by the present government. This anti-terrorist campaign is not only a recent phenomenon. It coincides with the period in which we resorted to neoliberal economic ideology, privatization of all state assets, which has created a massive unemployment situation in the country, opening up to indiscriminate, everyone needs foreign investment, but indiscriminate foreign investment. And the kind of people who are being arrested will be interesting for you to know. Now, there are only 3% convictions of all those arrested. Out of 100% arrested, only 3% are convicted. What does that show? That majority of the arrests were false and unjustified. And even in the case of these 3%, we really don't know whether the evidence was properly put forward, not put forward. Now, who are the ones who are being arrested? The indigenous tribal people. We have about 8% of our population consists of the first people of India, that is the indigenous people. Because India is a country where we've had waves upon waves of migration from Central Asia going on for centuries. The Dravidian people and the Adivasi people are the indigenous people. Whenever they have resisted confiscation of land and the takeover of their land and water resources, then they have been labeled as terrorists and arrested. Organizations which have assisted them also labeled as terrorists and arrested. But more than that, the state has gone even further. Any professor, any lawyer, any social scientist, any health worker, any researcher who focuses on the conditions of the socially, economically tribal people, or who focuses on, we have a large section of population in India, about 15%, which come in the category of the most backward socially and economically, because there has been a backlog of justice which we owe them, because they were in a situation of indentured or bonded labor, and therefore the whole caste was categorized as such. If anybody researches on these issues, latterly even they are picked up and labeled as terrorists. We had a case of a professor of Delhi University who was labeled as disabled. He was disabled and he was arrested as terrorist. Now, these rights which we have and which we are asserting are rights which we have fought for over centuries. Louis XIV said, "The state it is I." Today it is not monarchy, but the oligarchy of financial and corporate interests who have created states which are absolute states. To conclude, I would like to read from a dissenting judgment of a Supreme Court judge of the United States of America. And this is what he pronounced. Through size, corporations, once merely an efficient tool employed by individuals in the conduct of private business, has brought such concentration of economic power so that corporations are sometimes able to dominate the state. The changes are so fundamental and far-reaching as to lead other men with insight and experience to assert that this institution of civilized life is committing us to the rule of plutocracy. There has occurred a marked concentration of individual wealth, and the resulting disparity is a major cause of the existing depression. This was in 1933 that he penned this judgment. Such is the Frankenstein monster which states have created by the corporation. He also said, you can have either democracy in society or individuals with unlimited wealth, not both. In conclusion, I would like to say that we have to examine where are the real centers of power in our hollowed out democracies and republics, with unlimited financing of elections. But this is not the end of history. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε πολύ. Thank you, dear
Thank you
Nirver.
very much.
Τώρα ουσιαστικά
Next,
λογικά στη σειρά ήταν ο Φουάντ Μπακέρ,
we expected Fouad Bakir to speak, a Palestinian lawyer,
μέλος του Δημοκρατικού Μετώπου
member of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine and coordinator of its legal department in Lebanon. Fouad is a concrete case because we had invited him to talk here, but the Greek state refused to give him a visa because the Greek state cooperates with Israel and supports Israel. Fouad did not make it, could not come to Greece. He did not get a visa, and he will talk on video. But because internet is very poor in Lebanon, yesterday he also took part in our event at the lawyers board of, and we spoke about the policies of the Greek state that cooperates with Israel. And it's a pity that today Fouad was not able to come here because of the poor quality of internet in Lebanon. He could not make it. And next, Thanasis Kabayanis from the Greek Lawyers Association will speak, and he also defends the 11 fighters from Turkey, and we are very glad to have him among us. He will talk about things that have to do with anti-terrorist laws. So we will listen to Thanasis Kabayanis. Fouad Bakir will speak later because of this connection problem we had. Thanasis, we hear you. Thank you very much. I will speak in Greek. And I will speak slowly so that I am translated as well as possible. Regarding Fouad and the problems we had contacting him, this is a policy choice of the Greek government not to allow to a Palestinian lawyer who lives in Lebanon to be present among us in this symposium, which is a political, legal symposium bringing together lawyers from the whole world in order to discuss issues that cover a very rich agenda. The fact that the Greek state did not allow Fouad Bakir to be here, it's only because Fouad Bakir is Palestinian and the Greek state is totally on the side of Israel in this war on Gaza. I really hope and wish that we'll be able to listen to him and that we will not be able, they will not be able to gag the voice of the Palestinian people, the Palestinian resistance that we support with all our heart, even in this symposium. I'm very glad that I'm present in this symposium, on this panel, in this meeting that honors the memory of our colleague Brutem Tik. Here in Greece, maybe we have not had such an experience of penalization of legal work that our colleagues have in Turkey, but we know very well what it means to have a state with a military agenda and considers everybody who does not agree with this government is an enemy, and especially lawyers are the enemy. That's why Ebru Tiptik was not accorded a fair trial. In Greece, we also have attacks on lawyers working at the borders and try to help immigrants or refugees trying to cross over to this fortress Europe, and they become targets exactly because there are lawyers who give assistance and try to do their duty, to exercise their profession which is being the target because they fight against the pushbacks and these mortal policies that the Greek state and the European Union is carrying out at the borders. I think that our discussion is a great opportunity to talk about anti-terrorist laws in every country and to talk about our know-how. How do we fight against these laws that, according to Greek experience, we know that's a black hole in a neoliberal character of a penal law. I mean, it's the way in which the various states persecute persecute people that goes in a way that goes exactly against what we read in books about the liberal character of penal law. Greece has a rich experience in the application of such anti-terrorist laws in the past and even more recently. The first anti-terrorist law was the one of 1978 of the first government after the Greek dictatorship, a law that actually was not never implemented because there was a big resistance against it after the Greek dictatorship. Then in 1991, the first right-wing government for the first time passed a pure anti-terrorist law which connected political action with what we call organized crime. It's the first time that such a term is used, the terms that usually means the mafia, and now it is used to political activism, political actions. The Greeks among us, especially the more elderly ones, may remember that that government had sent to prison newspaper editors who had published declarations of armed organizations. And because they published these declarations, the editors of the newspapers were sent to prison. This law was abolished, but then came back in 2001. Then is the first time when in penal code they introduce the so-called Article 187 about criminal organizations. The circumstances is after September 11, so we have for the first time an article in Greek law that persecutes people who are members of a so-called criminal organization, even if that organization has never carried out any attack, any criminal act. This is incredible. You you persecute someone just because they are a member of an organization that wants to commit some action but has never committed such a terrorist action. This has not to do with the principles of liberal law. And there were many reactions against that law. It's the article on the basis of which the 17th November organization members were tried a few years after the law passed. In 2004, for the first time, we have a new article 187A in the Greek legal penal code. It's the pure form of anti-terrorism. This article, it's the pure form of an organization that threatens to shake the political and financial foundations of the country or to terrorize the population. According to that article, we understand that this article penalizes the intention. The intention gives the possibility to the state and to judges to decide if the intention of a certain action is terrorist or not. And that means that we have more and more stricter sentences. After 2004, there were even more additions to that legal article of the law, so as to enhance even more anti-terrorist law. There was a new provision about terrorist organization, and that means that the entire penal code, as long as it's decided that an organization threatens the foundations of the financial, political, etc. Structures of a country or terrorizes the population, then this particular crime is condemned with an even higher sentence. The Greek experience with anti-terrorist law means that this law was the reason for the biggest number of mistrials in Greek history. That is, a huge number of people were imprisoned illegally, and the trials itself proved it, that they were illegally imprisoned. The most cases have to do with these articles 187 and 187A that I just mentioned. This anti-terrorist article, the way in which courts of justice assessed even social relations, relations with friends, meant that even friends of the so-called terrorists, like their spouses, companions, friends, acquaintances, that they were just friends with these people, they were sentenced as terrorists. So these people who just gave some financial support to such an organization which collects money for legal defense, etc., they were accused of aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. Even translators, we have cases of comrades who were accused of aiding and abetting a terrorist organization. What we really have to remember in Greece is the so-called anti-terrorist service, which actually itself creates terrorism. I mean, I'm not exaggerating if I say that it's doubtful many times if the anti-terrorist organization confronts terrorism, or if it generates terrorism in order to ensure the continuation of its funding and of its role in society, in the media, and so on. Of course, with the help of judges, of journalists, who accept as a dogma whatever declaration this so-called anti-terrorist service publishes. We have, of course, the well-known example of our 11 comrades, Turkish comrades, as one of the most important examples of mistrial created by these articles of law I mentioned, 187 and 187A, 11 political refugees, comrades from Turkey, who lived and still live in Greece, and they lived in two apartments in the same residential buildings in the Sepolia area. They were persecuted and accused as members of a terrorist organization in March 2020 because in their house, for only 9 hours, they found some arms. The very fact that one of the 11 brought in that residential building, not even in the apartments themselves, just in the residential building, they brought these arms. And that fact was enough for the prosecutor's office to accuse all 11 comrades of terrorism, and they were actually condemned at first instance to 30 years of prison each. So we're talking about collective responsibility here. All the people living in these two apartments were condemned as terrorists, as owners of these arms, and as members of this terrorist organization. It's important that on second instance we managed to undo this. The first decision through the struggle we gave, through the hunger strike that the comrades did, because what we had at first instance was not a fair trial. On second instance, we managed to topple the first, to undo the first decision, the first ruling. The 11 comrades were absolutely declared not guilty for all condemnations, and only the 11th comrade was condemned for a minor accusation. It was such a defeat for the anti-terrorist service that the chief prosecutor immediately ordered for this ruling to be annulled. We want you to know this case because to be aware of this, because possibly the appeal will come to court, to the High Court, and now the militants are already struggling, showing solidarity. I'm already telling you now, especially to our international visitors, maybe we will need your solidarity in terms of the concrete case, because we know that the political pressure exercised by states and governments, and of course imperialist organizations, and the Turkish government in cooperation with Greek government to send our comrades back to prison, to have them sentenced for 30 years, and we will really need our participation, your participation and solidarity in case they want to try them again. To us, this case shows exactly why the struggle for a liberal penal law that guarantees the rights of accused persons have to do with the abolishment of anti-terrorist laws. Every progressive lawyer should, and every progressive person should try for this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Thanasis. It's very important that he mentioned this prosecution that was set up by the anti-terrorist service that 4 years ago. This prosecution continues to this day, like Thanasis presented to us. This is an unfair and very political ruling that is still pending because it was appealed by the prosecutor of the High Court, and in the 19th of March, the High Court asked to come back to the first instance ruling of a 30-year sentence. So we don't know what will happen, and it's not impossible that